Welcome, I'm Rose Aguilar, and this is Your Call. Today, we continue our Project 2025 series by focusing on what it means for the people. The Heritage Foundation-led authoritarian plan lays out a comprehensive agenda to transform the United States into a Christian nation under Donald Trump and future Republican presidents. Project 2025 would dismantle the administrative state and ensure arch-conservative rule for decades to come. It would affect all aspects of life and would be implemented by expanding presidential powers and by eliminating federal agencies. The Heritage Foundation's president, Kevin Roberts, told MSNBC the plan is to fire over 50,000 civil servants and replace them with 20,000 MAGA loyalists. The organization Democracy Forward has done an extensive read of Project 2025's, quote, mandate for leadership. In part one of last week's show with Democracy Forward's CEO, Skye Perryman, we discussed what Project 2025 would mean for food assistance, child labor laws, health care for veterans, abortion, and more. Well, we wanted to bring Skye back because we did not complete the entire agenda. Today, we're going to talk about the plan to, quote, embolden racial discrimination in everything from housing to education to employment, the plan to cut federal loan programs that help parents of college students, graduate students, and immigrants afford higher education, and the plan to worsen climate change. Skye Perryman is president and CEO of Democracy Forward, an organization that uses the law to build collective power and advance a vibrant democracy for all. They work on issues like fair wages, reproductive health care, post-Dobbs, education, and the climate crisis. Hi, Skye. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Hi, it's great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you back, Skye. Your group put together, I think, one of the most comprehensive guidelines on Project 2025. And I so appreciate that you talk about what it means for everyday people. So like I said, we went through the first half of your guide last week, and it's so important. You bring out things I have not read about in the media. And so we wanted to have you back for part two. So thank you so much for taking the time. And I do want to give out the phone number. If you've got any questions for Skye about what her group found in Project 2025, about what it would mean for everyday people, we'd love to hear from you. The toll-free number is 866-798-8255. You can also email your call at kalw.org. So let's dive right in. We left off at Project 2025, enabling discrimination across society. And you all write, threatened by decades of progress in advancing civil rights and equality for all, the authors of Project 2025 want to create a country that allows for more discrimination, where we live, study, work, and play, and roll back hard-fought victories by our movements for progress. So tell us how they would do this.
Well, there is many plans embedded in Project 2025 would roll back this hard-won progress. And as we talk about this, if you have listeners that are near a computer, they can go to democracyforward.org and find the link to our People's Guide. And that's what we're following and talking about today. And it's available for anyone that wants to access it. But one of the ways that that Project 2025 would seek to undermine civil rights and to really embrace a discrimination agenda is through seeking to weaponize our civil rights offices within agencies of the federal government, right? These are offices that are designed to ensure that services are rendered in an equitable way, in an equal way, right? They're agencies and offices that are designed to enforce laws that protect all people from things like housing discrimination or employment discrimination. They want to reverse the way we think about and interpret those laws, though doing everything from seeking to rewrite the law in a way that fails to recognize all elements of discrimination, seeking to undermine what is called a disparate impact standard, which may sound wonky, but it's really just a simple concept that some things may not specifically use discriminatory language, but they nevertheless have a disproportionately negative impact on a people group as a result of a discriminatory purpose, right? And so they want to eliminate those types of concepts and protections altogether in many ways by weaponizing our own federal government against us and by sort of seeking to push interpretations of the law that are not in keeping with the justice-based successes and wins and victories that communities across the country have seen over the past decades. So again, in our People's Guide, we actually cite the page where you can find these things on Project 2025, so you don't have to take our word for it. And we highlight that, which appears on page 583 and on page 72 of the guide as one example. There are more too, though. I know you're going to want to dig into the other ways too.
Yes, and also just to go back to this disparate impact, I think that's one of the things I love about your guide. I have to say, the one thing Project 2025 is doing for so many people is we're learning a lot more about what goes on behind the scenes in government. A disparate impact, I don't know if many people know about this, but as you write, Project 2025 proposes that the federal government stop using the long-standing use of disparate impact in assessing discrimination. You write that these standards have long been ruled constitutional by the Supreme Court, so Project 2025's attempts are baseless. So tell us more about how they would do this. You write that they would make it harder for historically under-resourced communities to access things like Medicaid, Head Start, and other government programs. And speaking of Head Start, we should say when we had you on last week,
Right.
They want to get rid of Head Start altogether.
Right, which is just such a cornerstone in so many ways of what it means to care for our communities and to ensure that the youngest among us have the resources and educational opportunities early on that they need. But yeah, so there's a range of these are very kind of tricky things that they seek to do. But in this guide, they want to even revise the way that we collect data on race and ethnicity. And this is something that we have seen because that data then forms the basis, right, of policies and enforcement. And so if you're not motivated by, you don't believe in equality for all, and you're not motivated by a civil rights agenda, then one way to try to stomp on justice and equality is to change the facts, right? Or to try to manipulate the data. And so this is actually something that we saw the prior administration do in different ways than what's outlined in Project 2025. But in the prior administration, Democracy Forward worked with the National Women's Law Center, and we had to sue the administration because they wanted to stop collecting wage data about demographics and gender and race, which is, data that would show, for instance, whether there's equal pay or not. They just wanted to stop collecting those data altogether, so that they didn't have a problem they would have to solve, right? If you sort of ignore the problem. Well, here they want to undermine revisions that the Biden-Harris administration have put forward with respect to how race and ethnicity data, federal data, is collected and maintained in order to be able to undermine a civil rights enforcement agenda and an equitable agenda. So that's one way they would do it. It's in a very tricky way. They don't just, some of this, they say the quiet part out loud and they just come right out and say, we want to eliminate Head Start or we want to eliminate the Department of Education. But in other ways they do, the plan is quite layered in its way. And so we break that down in the People's Guide. Another thing that they would do is they want to actually eliminate an office that was established in the White House for Gender Policy Council, the Gender Policy Council, which is really has been a key office at promoting contraception access, at reducing gender-based violence, and at promoting women's health equity, including, for instance, cancer treatments and other types of scientific and advancements that are necessary for women's health. I believe that's just such a brazen example in Project 2025, where we have a project where only a few years past the Supreme Court overturning the rights of women across the board. And instead of trying to make it better and restore those rights, the Project 2025 would actually even take out offices that are doing their best to promote equity and equality for women.
This is so important, Skye, because a lot of these details just don't get the attention they deserve. So let's just spend a couple minutes talking
Yeah.
about this. So you all report that under the Biden administration, the White House Gender Policy Council has led efforts to increase access to contraception. And you included a link to the announcement here. This came out in February, and I'll just read from this White House press release. Officials from the White House Gender Policy Council, the Department of Health and Human Services, participated in accessible consumer choices, shaping the future of contraceptive care at pharmacies. This was a summit hosted by the American Pharmacists Association. At the summit, participants discussed barriers that limit access to contraception at the pharmacy counter, as well as the importance of pharmacies and pharmacists in providing women with expanded contraception options. Participants also highlighted opportunities for federal and state officials, as well as the private sector, to improve access at pharmacies. So, this is so important at a time when Republicans are going after contraception. These are the little details that are going on behind this. Well, they're not little things that are going on behind the scenes that we just don't hear about. I have not heard about this, that there was a summit that's talking with pharmacists about how to ensure that people have access to affordable, high quality contraception. That is so important given what we're dealing with right now. Can you talk
Exactly.
about that, Skye, about how you all dug deeper? So you didn't just say that Project 2025 would eliminate the White House Gender Policy Council.
Right.
You talked about what that would actually mean and what has been happening at that policy council.
Right. And that's one thing we really wanted to do in our development of this resource for people, because everybody's very busy and has a number of things going on in their daily lives. And so sometimes we read these things and they seem, they frankly, some of the stuff on its face seems pretty extreme and ridiculous. I mean, saying you're going to eliminate a gender policy council, saying you're going to eliminate the Department of Education. I mean, those already seem quite extreme, but there's actually many more implications to all of our daily lives. And so we really wanted people to understand that there are core functions that these offices, that agencies of the federal government, that civil servants play in our lives and what would really happen. Because one of the things that we've seen is that some of this stuff is so extreme, it's hard for people to believe that it can happen here, right? And then once it does, people are quite shocked, or they wish they would have done something differently or understood earlier on. And so we wanted to prevent that from happening, which is what we're doing in this People's Guide. And again, that's available at democracyforward.org, where folks can download it, and we're supplementing it with more information as more information comes available. But that's, in fact, yes, the Gender Policy Council has done very positive things to help access to contraception, as well as really to engage on how to prevent gender-based violence, which is, of course, in keeping with President Biden's leadership early in his career as a senator with the Violence Against Women Act and other core legislative proposals. And so those are all in the chopping block here if the Project 2025 architects get their way.
This is another really important one. You also write about the National Plan to End Gender-Based Violence, and this came out in May of last year. This is a 150-page plan, very, very extensive about what needs to happen to address partner violence. There's so many things here. Launching a strategy to address intimate partner violence, expanding support for the administration of grants to tribes, allocating funding for the DOJ Violence Against Women Act programs. I mean, we could do a whole week of shows just on this issue.
Absolutely. And of course, we know it's a critical issue. We know that there There have been many strides made, but of course, in many communities across the country, we still, gender-based violence is something that affects all communities, and there's definitely have been, highly concerning upticks in that violence and during the pandemic, of course, and there's been a lot of work to do to try to make sure that communities are supported, and that's exactly what our government has been doing. But that's not the thing that the architects of Project 2025 want the government spending its resources on. And I think that's really one of the things we wanted to highlight in the People's Guide is that, government and governing is about choices. And there's a slate of choices that our government has made. We may not always agree with them all the time, but they do reflect values. And when you have a policy agenda and is putting forward plans to dismantle many of the best things that we've been able to achieve through our government, to try to make people's lives better, it really gives you a sense of the extremism that's at play in American society.
And again, in case you haven't heard about this, this is the first of its kind national action plan to end gender-based violence. It was announced by the White House last year. One more thing that's really important. The White House announced a new initiative to study women's health. This happened in November. The press release says, despite making up more than half the population, women have historically been understudied and underrepresented in health research. This
Yes.
initiative will fundamentally change how we approach and fund women's health research and pioneer the next generation of discoveries in women's health. This is so important because so many of the studies out there focus on men, and we know that when women go to the doctor, in many cases, we're just not taken seriously. So this is very, very important. And Project 2025 would completely get rid of this initiative.
Yes, and it's been, yes, well, then it's been an initiative, through the Gender Policy Council. And so eliminating that council really puts this in the balance. And I will tell you, as someone that prior to being the CEO of Democracy Forward, I was the general counsel of the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, which is the nation's leading organization of physicians dedicated to the health of women. This is a real challenge in women's health. You can talk to physicians about it, healthcare professionals about it, researchers about it. In the COVID-19 pandemic, it wasn't a foregone conclusion that pregnant women would be included in research, right, around the vaccine to understand the safety of the vaccine with respect to pregnancy, right? I mean, there's a number of ways that science needs to catch up to the fact that women are, equal participants in our society too. And this administration has done a lot to enhance research in women's cancers, women's healthcare prevention, preventive care. All of that, of course, has been, a lot of that has been facilitated through the Policy Council, which Project 2025 seeks to eliminate. While we're on this topic, I'll just point out, and we have recently just put out a bulletin that we can send, and your listeners can find it on our website as well, about how some of these ideas that are in Project 2025 are also alive and well in the courts. These extreme groups are trying to implement this agenda through the courts. And one way they're doing that is they're challenging things like the Affordable Care Act's preventive services protection, which has provided copay free contraception to people, which has enabled folks to get mammograms and other types of cancer screenings free of charge to them, so that we can ensure that people are engaging in and seeking and able to access preventive care. And so this is just another manifestation of the threats that we see to that very important those very important programs we see, built right here in Project 2025 with the elimination of the Gender Policy Council. But there are some other ways. Do we want to go into sort of what this program is doing with respect to young people and LGBTQ youth and others?
Yes, please.
So we also outline, when we talk about discrimination across society, that Project 2025 has, is really seeking to enable. There are programs that Project 2025 sort of seeks to permit discrimination against LGBTQ youth that are in adoption and foster care systems and agencies. And this is really something that I think people don't always recognize, but there's a number of data sources that the federal government keeps around foster care and adoption. And Project 2025 again would seek to dismantle a lot of that record keeping, and really, and then at the same time seeks a sort of very religious and ideological, specific ideological agenda that could enable discrimination against LGBTQ youth in foster care and adoption systems or in our healthcare system overall. That's on page 477 of the of Project 2025, the mandate for leadership. And so, I think one of our main themes is when we try to dig deep so people really understood, your eyes don't gloss over to say, okay, yeah, they're going to do this with this agency. What does that really mean? This is really around people, and faith should not be used as a license for the government to enable discrimination against fellow people in our country. And so we see that rearing its head in Project 2025, and then of course saw that in the prior administration as well.
So how would this work exactly? Project 2025 would make it easier for state and child welfare agencies to cite religious exemptions as a way to promote bigotry. How would that work?
Exactly. So there's a range of civil rights and sort of just general standards that our federal agencies enforce when they're providing funding to or otherwise regulating programs across the country. And one of the things we saw in the prior administration and that you see throughout Project 2025, this is one manifestation of it. It also, we see it on a range of other topics in Project 2025, is the misuse of religious exemptions to cause harm to people in our population. So this would mean that institutions or agencies or states could refuse to provide certain services, could refuse to engage in sort of ways that they are supposed to under our civil rights laws by claiming that they have sort of a broader religious or moral objection to that. While there are many protections, of course, for people's personal and moral beliefs, there are a number those don't get to extend to be able to harm other people in society, which is part of what the plans in Project 2025 would seek to do, and of course was part of a very unfortunate and harmful pattern that we saw out of certain agencies in the prior administration, which Democracy Forward actually had to work with a lot of groups in order to sue in court to prevent that from happening. So we see that rearing its head here again. And so that's another piece. But it's not just in this healthcare context and in the sort of housing and education context that we've been talking about. I can talk to you about other ways that we see this enabling of discrimination, including in the environmental context, if you'd like to sort of just talk about that too.
Sure. Do you want to talk about the next one about putting Black communities and others that have historically borne the brunt of health impacts from pollution and other environmental harms at increased risk?
Yeah, so this has really been actually a real progress marker where the Environmental Protection Agency in our federal government has an office that's been created. It's the Environmental Justice and Civil Rights Office as part of the agency, and it is dedicated to ensuring that environmental and public health policies are implemented in ways that ensures that no community gets left behind or is disproportionately harmed. That's our disproportionate language again, right? Because what we do know is a result of structural and systemic barriers that have existed and continue to exist, that many communities, whether they're communities of color, rural communities, or others that are historically and in many cases currently underserved, bear the brunt of a lot of environmental toxicity and environmental problems. And so the EPA has sought to meet that moment and to really begin to ensure that the federal government is doing all that it can to monitor those risks and to solve for those risks. But yet Project 2025 wants to take a wrecking ball to that progress, and in so doing endanger communities, including Black communities that have historically borne the brunt of these health impacts from poor environmental quality.
So their plan is to completely get rid of the EPA's newly created Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights.
Yes.
Wow.
It's a dismantling, as we said. And it's not just, and they seem to be very focused on these target populations that are, of course, supposed to be benefiting from some of the remedies that have been put in place in order to remedy current and past discrimination. They really want to ignore that and eliminate it. They do a number of other things in terms of seeking to rewrite the law and to deny progress on civil rights. They want to roll back protections for LGBTQ people in the workplace. They want to actually rewrite what the Supreme Court, including the Supreme Court said several years ago, which included a conservative justice was in that majority, that ensures that workplace protections for LGBTQ people are in place, and making sure that people understand that sex discrimination is prohibited, and that includes discrimination based on sexual orientation, which is what our Supreme Court has said. And so, there's really no stopping how extreme this is, and really their attempt to rewrite even our laws in the country. And so we see that too. And that's Project 2025. It's in the 500s, page 584 and 586. And we really want to make sure that people, especially people that have an interest in the LGBTQ community and equity for all people, focus on that piece.
And they write Project 2025 would try to enable greater workplace discrimination through allowing employers to impose their religious or moral beliefs on their employees. Project 2025 would leave already vulnerable people at increased risk for discrimination when trying to rent an apartment, go to school, and more. Today, we're talking with Skye Perryman, President and CEO of Democracy Forward, an organization that uses the law to build collective power and advance a vibrant democracy for all. They took a look and did an extensive read of Project 2025's 900 plus page document. And then they put together a 48-page report called The People's Guide to Project 2025. They say that this would really affect all aspects of our lives. Last week, we had Skye on talking about everything from abortion to getting rid of Head Start, food assistance, healthcare for veterans. You can find that show at kalw.org, click news, and then your call. Well, we wanted to have Skye back to go over the rest of the document. So we just finished the discrimination part. And after a break, we will talk about the section called Set Polluters Loose and Undo Climate Action. This is your call. We'll be back after this. This is Your Call. I'm Rose Aguilar. Today, we are continuing our series on Project 2025 by focusing on what it means for the people. We're joined by Skye Perryman, President and CEO of Democracy Forward. They put out a 48-page report called The People's Guide to Project 2025. They write, from attacking overtime pay, student loans, and reproductive rights to allowing more discrimination, pollution, and price gouging, those behind Project 2025 are preparing to go to incredible lengths to create a country only for some, not for all of us. If you'd like to join us, the toll-free number is 866-798-8255. You can also email your call at kalw.org. Let's hear from David in Berkeley. Hi, David. Welcome to the show.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to put names to the subject that was mentioned there. Trump had recently or earlier had performed much of these cutbacks and shutdowns. He's had a dry run. Mick Mulvaney, he was part of the Consumer Protection Agency, and Elaine Chao, Secretary of Labor. Mulvaney cut back the powers of consumer protection agencies. And then only recently, now the Democrats are in, that much of the protections were reinstated here in 2024. Had he not been in office, had he been in office, there would have been no agency at all. Elaine Chao was Secretary of Labor, and the Inspector General released a report on numerous ethics violations. But Trump had elected people to block and decline to open any criminal investigations. So this blueprint you see most certainly has had a dry run. And it won't go away unless we make sure that the progress the Democrats have made are edified. And for instance, Chow was Labor Secretary. Well, there was $80 million given to LA to expand their transportation system. I think it was only 2 months ago they celebrated, if not less. So I just wanted to leave those comments.
Well, thank you for the comments, David. And I'm glad you brought this up because the architects of Project 2025 talk about this. They say that they had a similar plan in place for the Reagan administration, but they didn't put it out in advance, well in advance, in order for everything to be implemented. So this time around, they put out Project 2025 well in advance, and they have announced publicly, Kevin Roberts, the Heritage Foundation president, went on MSNBC and said the plan is to fire over 50,000 civil servants and replace them with 20,000 MAGA loyalists. And the plan is to be ready on day one. So, Skye, this is an important point because they said everything we're talking about today is going to be implemented in the first 180 days if Trump becomes president.
Right. So there's what we tried to do in our people's, I have a few, and thank you to the caller for this question, just a few things. So one is everything that we put in our people's guide and much of what is in Project 2025 are the types of things that they will argue that they're able to do through the executive branch, right? Through the president and the White House and the executive agencies that they control without the approval of Congress, which by the shorthand of that means that you could reasonably expect much of these things would be day one types of actions, or at least in the first few months. And that's what this first part of Project 2025, they say it is. Now, some things like elimination of the Department of Education requires congressional action, and it's kind of baked in there. But many of the things there are in day one. And that is what we really tried to focus in our People's Guide. You don't see us mention a lot of the things that Congress could do later on, which they're also going to push for. We're really focused on those day one activities. The comment that the listener has around the Heritage Foundation sort of history of this is right on. The Heritage Foundation brags on its website that even in the former administration, not even having to go back to Reagan, but just in the prior administration, that 2/3 of its proposals were implemented. There's a lot of speculation about what led the Heritage Foundation to publish this time. I think some of it was that there has been an impression, I think it says this at times, there was an impression that after the 2016 election, when many were not expecting that Trump would win, the Trump administration was quite disorganized in the way that they went about policymaking, and that frustrated a lot of these kind of far right interests that wanted to be ready to go day one. And so they're seeking to sort of get out ahead of it by making these preparations, which I think, obviously has been publicized for the American people through Project 2025.
Well, thanks again for calling, David. If you'd like to join us, the toll-free number is 866-798-8255. You can also email your call at kalw.org. Let's talk about the next section here. It's called Set Polluters Loose and Undo Climate Action. I am so glad that you all focused on this because I'm just waiting for more attention. I'm hoping that at next Tuesday night's debate, the moderators are going to talk about the climate crisis. we're all feeling the heat right now in the western part of the country. The East Coast felt it last week. I mean, the temperatures in Arizona, I can't even imagine uh, just multiple days of 100-degree weather and higher. So, for a little bit of context, I always go back to Professor Kimberly Nicholas, who we've had on the show. She has her latest book is called Under the Sky We Make: How to Be Human in a Warming World. And she writes that we have to deal with the climate crisis by the year 2030. That is a major, major deadline. And so whoever wins in November is either going to take action on this or is not. So let's talk about what Project 2025 calls for when it comes to the climate crisis. You all write, we've waited decades for meaningful and robust federal action to combat climate change and protect people from the harms of pollution. Project 2025 could not care less about these threats, and now they want to destroy our hard fought gains. They would make our air dirtier and worsen climate change. Project 2025 would make it even harder for the EPA to take action against climate change by attacking the endangerment finding. So here's something most of us have probably never heard of. What is the endangerment finding?
Yeah, so it's a finding that the agency makes that sort of then can determine the level of climate action that's taken. And what's really important here, there's recent reporting out. It's not reflected in our People's Guide, but there's recent reporting out that suggests that in the prior administration, the administration officials that were at EPA, sort of professionals that were at EPA, there have been documents that have been uncovered suggesting that they thought there would be no basis to revisit that finding when they were urged to, and that and groups like the Union of Concerned Scientists and other experts have of course said that if you were to revisit that finding, you would actually find that there's greater endangerment, right? And that it would not be making sort of a finding that would lead to less climate action. It would actually lead to more. But ignoring all of that science, all of the evidence, and everything that the experts say. And again, this is another piece. I just want to bring this back to the civil service that we talked about last time. These agencies, are filled with civil servants who are professional experts in their areas, right? That study, that do their whole job is to study and understand and make recommendations and do what the facts and evidence call them to do, not what a particular political ideology does. And yet, that we have again in Project 2025 an attempt to sort of take a wrecking ball to all of that and to actually gut that endangerment finding, quote, updating it, but updating it in a restrictive way that would harm the federal government's ability to combat climate change and to advance public health. And this is critical. And you find this explanation on page 425 of Project 2025. But I just want to underscore, I mean, you've mentioned the urgency of our climate crisis, but we know that among voters under the age of 40, this is a huge issue, right? Because this is the earth and the world that they're living in, that their children and grandchildren are going to live in, and we're in a very precarious situation. The federal government is seeking to do more, and yet this would send a wrecking ball to a lot of that progress against the experts, against what even people at the agency in the prior administration sort of privately concluded. So it's really concerning.
I'm going to go through a few of these quickly because I just
Yeah,
realized
that's
we only
fine.
have about 15 minutes
Okay,
left.
so
And
let's go through. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
so a couple others: cut off weather, ocean, and climate data by disbanding NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. Transfer environmental funding away from mission-based entities to state regulators who in many cases do not support sustainable policies. Project 2025 seeks to undo progress made through the Inflation Reduction Act by any means necessary. Expand offshore oil and natural gas drilling on public lands and waters. Project 2025 would push the Department of the Interior to allow oil and natural gas leases sales to the maximum extent permitted. What would you say, Skye, alarms you the most about what Project 2025 would do to the planet, given the emergencies we're dealing with?
Let me say, I think it's highly alarming, and the trend to rewrite evidence and reality is what should concern all of us, right? Because that can really set us back, not just in the next few years, but over the course of our lifetime. And I would just highlight, just to make sure people heard it clearly, and we explain it more in the People's Guide. You can go to democracyforward.org to get the People's Guide and read it for yourself. But the dismantling of NOAA, which is a part of our EPA system that is responsible for things like our weather service, that is how I just want to be clear, like that is how extreme this plan is, but also how much it would affect our daily lives. So I think those are some things to highlight. I know you want to get to education, and then we've got to get to our fundamentally the government's ability to deliver for people, which is also attacked in Project 2025.
Well, I'm just looking on the NOAA Twitter
Yeah.
page. I mean, they put out so much information here. Hurricane season runs through November
Exactly.
30th. Be prepared. We need to know when hurricanes are coming. We need to let people know what's going on. They've got tweets about extreme rain bringing catastrophic flooding to parts of Connecticut and New York. I mean, we need this kind of data. It's again, Skye, I even think, could they really do this? I mean, given how important this data is to let people know what's happening,
I mean,
could they really get rid of NOAA?
In the last administration, we had to stop them from deleting massive amounts of climate data.
Right.
And yes, I mean, I think that like they believe they can do anything they want to do. Their right-wing legal movement has systematically dismantled many checks and balances. Groups like ours will fight every day to keep this from happening, of course. But I think it's a highly, this is a very serious threat. When extremists show you who they are, you need to believe them. I mean, that's what we say over and over in our work, and it's true here. And I think that the weather service pieces, especially as we just come through the season of storms and everything else, are really important to highlight.
And we should just reiterate this again, Project 2025, it was spearheaded by the Heritage Foundation. They have 100 coalition partners who worked on this and wrote up all of this. And a couple that stand out are the names: Alliance Defending Freedom, of course, the American Legislative Exchange Council.
Yeah.
That's the group that gets money from corporations, and then they write copycat bills that are passed across the country, mostly in Republican-controlled states, and then a number of anti-choice organizations. A lot of these I've never heard of, but then you've got the Claremont Institute, the Eagle Forum. They've been around for a long time. Family Research Council. What else strikes you about the groups that are involved in all of this, Skye?
Well, they are all these groups, and the ones you mentioned, like Alliance for Defending Freedom, were opposite them a lot, but I mean, they're behind the overturning of Roe v. Wade, right? I mean, many of these groups are funded by the same far-right networks. They have implicitly or expressly supported everything from overturning, the right to reproductive health care and abortion to undermining voting rights. And I think what you see here is that they're quite serious about getting organized and being coordinated, and really driving an agenda that it doesn't represent the majority of people in the country. That's, by the way, why Project 2025 has become this flashpoint where everyone's trying to distance themselves, because this is not something that is popular with people. It's deeply harmful. But we've seen, they have legal strategies that we have to counter in the courts all the time. We see that they work across a range of these agencies and issues. And so I think it's, really important that we take them seriously and understand that the vision for the country is not one that is a country for everyone, is not one that is a country for all of us, is that is a friend of science and innovation. And they really want a country that's only for some and not for all. And so that's much of our work is countering those groups every day, which is why Project 2025 has taken on such a prevalence for us.
And because it's getting so much attention, Trump claims to not really know what it's about. Moms for Liberty is also part of Project 2025. They had a major event a couple of days ago, according to Slate. 600 moms and grandmothers.
Yeah, right outside our windows in Washington. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. A fair number of dads were there, and Trump was there for an hour. He talked a lot about immigration, but they seem to be very obsessed with trans children. Book bans were initially what they really focused on, and now they're really focused on trans children. So let's talk about the next section of Project 2025, making education unaffordable and unwelcome. What did you
Yes.
find here about what they would do to education?
Well, it's what they would do for education and what we're already seeing in places like Texas and Florida, where we're having to sue in order to restore rights for people. So because we're running short on time, I'll just say, like, very broadly, they want to champion an education system that is only for some and not for all. So that's everything from cutting federal loan programs that help first generation Americans, that help parents of, immigrants, frankly, loan programs that help people that go into public service, that work for a nonprofit or go work for, the government in order to give back. They want to dismantle or revise many of those programs. They want to engage and make our classrooms sort of ideological flashpoints as opposed to houses of education, where, everything from banning books and sort of engaging in restrictive curricula to seeking to rewrite history, to penalizing schools that enforce civil rights and ensure equality towards everyone. It's all in here. And again, these are the proposals that they are claiming they can do just in the first 180 days. There are other proposals, such as dismantling the entire Department of Education, which Project 2025 calls for, that would take some, potentially take more time than just the first 180 days. So we try to focus in these 4 pages in the People's Guide on the major things that they would do on day one: reversing progress on Title IX, which ensures discrimination-free education. So, and then of course, this obsession that they have with targeting and bullying and using the state to target and bully trans people and trans youth, which is, straight out of an authoritarian playbook to target a particular people group based on perceived differences that they may have from the majority, right? To make them into, sort of to make them into a sort of ideological flashpoint, and to undermine their humanity. And so we see that with their treatment of immigrants. We see that with their treatment of LGBTQ people, and particularly trans people and non-binary and gender non-conforming students and people. And so it's really important, not only from a policy perspective, because we know this is bad policy, but frankly, from a moral perspective, that the American people make it clear that this type of hatred does not belong in our country.
They would also make it easier for charter schools to discriminate against LGBTQ plus students.
Yes. And there's a range of these policies, and a lot of them revolve around seeking to privatize some of the broader policies, seeking to privatize education, enable broader discrimination, weaponize our own Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights to actually, to actually make it harder for people to feel like they belong as opposed to easier. And so all of these things are very concerning.
Mm. And then the next section, undermining the government's ability to deliver for the people. So this really focuses on Project 2025's plan to fire 50,000 civil servants and then replace them with 20,000 MAGA loyalists. Tell us more about how they would do it and what concerns you the most.
Absolutely. So this, I think, is one of the most concerning elements of Project 2025, because it's not only going to put our services that people in the country need, employment that people in the country need, in the balance, but it really seeks to undermine this notion that our government is of, by, and for the people. It should deliver for the people, right? This is a very dark and nihilistic notion that is seeking to make our government into a self-serving enterprise, as opposed to an enterprise that is supposed to be serving the common good. And so what they would do here is they would reimpose Schedule F, which was an executive order that the Trump administration sought to impose on its way out of office, that of course the Biden administration immediately rescinded. They would seek to reimpose that to reclassify civil servants so that they could be purged and replaced with partisan loyalists. That's very concerning for all the reasons we've discussed, right? Because these civil servants have expertise and are really, they speak truth to power. They do their jobs regardless of sort of who is in power, and really driven by the facts and by public service, and then by their oath that they all take to our Constitution, not to a particular political agenda. But they would do other things, like seek to administer ideologically biased tests for federal workers as part of this sort of purge agenda. They would seek to meddle with our national security agencies and alter sort of the process for security clearance and security clearance reviews, which is really highly concerning. And then there's a range of other things that we've seen that are not in the pages of Project 2025, but that we know the groups behind it have advocated for that would further undermine our government's ability to deliver for people. And so while we look at this, we have to think about the federal workers that, of course, we know need their jobs and do good jobs. And we certainly don't want those jobs to be in jeopardy for a political ideology. But we also have to think about the harms that that all of the American people will experience if the people that are regulating the environment, doing environmental work at the EPA, or people doing food and drug regulation at the FDA are partisan loyalists and ideologically motivated, as opposed to being motivated by the common good and by our facts and evidence and sort of the expertise of their profession. So this really concerns us. It's an undermining of our democracy. It's an undermining of the notion that our government is of, by, and for the people. And we wanted to highlight that in the People's Guide, which again, your listeners can get at democracyforward.org and can have the People's Guide for themselves.
Skye, final thoughts. The Washington Post has a piece about how the Democrats made Project 2025 one of their top anti-Republican attacks. It is getting so much attention. And I just wonder, what are your thoughts? Do you feel like it's clear that a lot of people know about Project 2025, but do you think they know the nuts and bolts? And we have about a minute left.
I think that it's encouraging that people are paying attention to Project 2025. I think that but I don't think that people fully understand everything that's at stake here, in part because it's just unbelievable, right? It's just so extreme, it almost seems unbelievable. And that is one reason that we produced the People's Guide and that we've been working, very hard to ensure that people have the information for themselves about how this will affect their lives. We are hopeful that there's millions of people have viewed the People's Guide and are using our resources, and we really hope that it will empower people to take control of their role in our country and their ability in this time to support democracy.
Skye Perryman is president and CEO of Democracy Forward. They put together a 48-page report called The People's Guide to Project 2025. You can find it at kalw.org, click news, and then your call. Skye, thank you so much for your great work, to you and your team, and thank you for joining us again.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us, Aguilar. It's your call.